there's several things I could speak on, but given the limited time, I'm actually going to speak on just one. Why China is a socialist market economy in line with Marx. And I'm not going to talk about what other people said, Marx said. I'm going to discuss what Marx said. We also have to understand the significance of this matter. China is the fastest growing major economy in the whole of human history. 9.2% a year growth for 42 years since 1978. It's lifted 853 million people out of poverty by World Bank standards. And it has increased household consumption in China since 1978 by 1,800%. This is therefore in a country which is now 18% of the world's population. So this is a gigantic fact. It is not a small theoretical issue of interest only to a few socialists. As Radhika already kindly said, that what I'm going to give is a very short exposition of what you can find in my latest book on China, China's Great Road. Okay, right. Because of the USSR's weight in the world, it in fact took a vision. It presented a vision of socialism, which was that of the post-1922 USSR. In the post-1929 USSR, essentially all means of production and exchange were state-owned, down to local shops, restaurants, etc. Agriculture was collectivized. It was an administered economy. I would say it's a better description than even a planned economy. It was administered. The economy was controlled down to small details. It was illegal to sell a small item at a different price in Moscow and Vladivostok, which were more than 6,000 kilometers away. Resources were allocated within this economy not by markets, but by material balances. Because the economy was administered down to small details, foreign trade necessarily had to be kept to a minimum, as trade into market economies could not be planned in the same way as the domestic economy. Therefore, this economy could not make use of international division of labor, which turned out to be a fatal flaw. Now, leave aside the question of whether this type of economy was necessary for geopolitical reasons. Most of my Russian friends would argue that faced with foreign encirclement, particularly by Nazism, it was necessary to create such an economy in order to prioritize military production and the defense of the country. I'm not going to enter into whether that geopolitical argument is right or wrong. I just want to show that it's easy to show that this economic model was not the one envisaged by Marx during the development of a socialist society. And therefore, the fact that China does not correspond to the model of the post-1929 USSR does not, as much of the Western left think, means, therefore it has diverged from socialism. It means actually it's much closer to Marx than was the post-1929 USSR. Now, hang on, I've got a mess now. I can't, for some reason. The slides have got stuck. I don't know what's happened.
They've moved forward. I can now see a slide called Marx on the transition to socialism.
Ah, right. Okay, sorry. There was just some delay. Let me get it up. Okay, right. It was clear that Marx envisaged the transition from capitalism to socialism would be a prolonged one. The appropriate unit of measurement is actually centuries. We don't know whether 2, 3, or possibly more. We're 150 years away already from the time when the working class first took power for a few weeks in the Paris Commune, and 104 years away from when the working class still took power and maintained it for a long period in the Russian Revolution. Okay. Therefore, it was clear that Marx envisaged that this transition from capitalism to communism would be a prolonged one. He noted in the Communist Manifesto, and I put the screen up because I want to, it's easier to take in quotations if you can see them rather than just read them. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degree, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. Please note the by degree. Marx therefore clearly envisaged a period during which state-owned property and private property would both exist. China's system, after Deng, of simultaneous existence of sectors of state and private ownership, is therefore already clearly more in line with Marx's conceptualization than Stalin's introduction all at once of essentially 100% state ownership in 1929. This is not, somehow this is not interacting properly with Zoom, and I can't get it down. Oh, right, okay, sorry, it's gone up, right, okay. Right, having taken the early things, I want to jump ahead to one of the last works which Marx wrote, The Critique of the Gotha Program. This, therefore, may be taken to involve his most mature thought, right? What did Marx write in this? What we are dealing with here, he's talking about the post-capitalist transition to a communist society. What we are dealing with here is a communist society, not as it is developed on its own foundations, but on the contrary, just as it emerges from capitalist society, which is thus in every respect, economically, morally, and intellectually, still stamped with the birthmarks of the old society from whose womb it emerges. Marx then goes on to discuss what would be these birthmarks, as he put it, of the old society. In such a transition, Marx outlined payment in society and distribution of products and services necessarily had to be according to work. This is his phrase, which he counterposes to according to need, as will come on in a fully developed communist society, even within the state-owned sector of the economy. Again, I quote Marx. Accordingly, the individual producer receives back from society, after the deductions have been made, exactly what he gives to it. What he has given to it is his individual quantum of labour. He draws from the social stock of means of consumption as much the same amount as labour cost. The same amount of labour which is given to society in one form, he receives back in another. Marx he uses a deliberately paradoxical phrase, but which has a scientific value. He notes that in the initial stages of socialism, in labour, what Marx terms bourgeois right, not according to needs, will exist. Again, I quote Marx. Here, obviously, the same principle prevails as that which regulates the exchange of commodities, as far as this is the exchange of equal values. As far as the distribution of the latter amongst the individual producers is concerned, the same principle prevails as in the exchange of commodity equivalents. A given amount of labour in one form is exchanged for an equal amount of labour in another form. Hence, equal right here is still in principle bourgeois right. The right of the producers is proportional to the labour they supply. This system of payment of work, not on the basis of need, is precisely what is used by Deng and in China. Right. Therefore, Marx is quite clear in the initial stages of socialism, inequality will necessarily exist. Not that it's desirable. Of course, it's extremely undesirable. But he's just noting that this is because of the early development of social society, this is what exists. As he writes, it tacitly assumes the unequal individual endowment. To avoid all these defects, right would have to be unequal rather than equal. Right. And then Marx goes on to look at the conditions over a prolonged period over which these can be overcome, because these birthmarks of this new society are not desirable, they're merely inevitable. As Marx writes, right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development, which this determines. In a higher phase of communist society, after the productive forces have also increased, with the all-round development of the individual and all the springs of commonwealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Now, what China is in, as it self-defines, is therefore the preliminary or the primary, as it puts, stage of socialism, which therefore has these features which Marx analyzed. Right. Okay. So it is not China that diverged from Marx. It was the post-1929 USSR which diverged from Marx. Put in economic terms, the post-1929 USSR was an ultra-left adventure. Let's leave aside whether it was necessary for geopolitical reasons, I've said, right, okay. But it was not in line with what Marx said, and China is. Okay. This post-1929 system eventually, of course, led to economic slowdown and crisis, whereas China's is the most successful economy in terms of growth in human history. Then I already gave you some of the data earlier, right? What does this prove? It proves that Marx was right. Before concluding, I just want to deal with one or two issues which are raised in objections to this. Right. First, obviously, as Marx outlined, there would be, for a prolonged period, the existence both of a state sector of the economy and a private sector of the economy. Now, some people say, well, we know this is the mixed economy of capitalism, but it's not. In the transition to socialism, both state and private property will exist, but which is dominant? In a mixed economy, capitalist private property is dominant. In a socialist market economy, state property is dominant. Right. Right. We could take this in form of words, but I always think actions are speak much louder than words. But nevertheless, let's take the form of words just to make it clear of what the positions of the CPC and China is. This is the last major plenum of the Central Committee of the CPC, which discussed the question of the economy. Its formula was, we must unswervingly consolidate and develop the public economy, persist in the dominant position of public ownership, give full play to the leading role of the state-owned sector. Right, now let's turn from words, however, to practice. And the best way to look at this is to look at it in a crisis. What happens in a capitalist society in a crisis? Private investment collapses because the private sector dominates the main means of production. This is what I've just taken here, the last big recession, the recession of 2007 to 2009. This, as you can see, is the pattern within the US economy. It's quite clear. The recession is completely dominated by the collapse in private investment. Okay, right. Now, actually, strange enough, the difference to China was actually very well put by Tom Orlick, who's a bourgeois writer on China, but a very serious one and very worth reading. He is a proper expert on many matters regarding Chinese statistics, etc. He put it very accurately, the difference between China and capitalism. Most economies can pull two levers to bolster growth, fiscal and monetary. China has a third option. The National Development and Reform Commission can accelerate the flow of investment projects. And the reason for this is because 40%, which is enough to control the economy, of investment in China is state-owned. What therefore happened during the international financial crisis in China is shown here. It looks like the graph of the United States turned upside down, because it basically is, in a certain sense, the graph of the United States turned upside down. What actually happened was, confronted with the financial crisis, China used its huge state sector to make sure that state investment actually, and therefore all investment, rose more rapidly than the economy as a whole. This was only possible because it's state sector. This shows quite clearly that it is the state sector, not the private sector, which is dominant within China's economy. Finally, just conclude, why is this discussion crucial for billions of people? Because China is an economic system which other countries can use and which demonstrably works. It's not a theoretical thing, it works. It has taken 853 million people out of poverty. As Fidel Castro put it, China has objectively become the most promising hope and the best example for all third world countries. And those who don't want to learn from China are trying to turn billions of people away from an economic system that demonstrably works. And this doesn't help the people who are struggling against capitalism. It damages the people who are struggling against capitalism. Fortunately, discussion of this is beginning to spread greatly internationally. Just to take yesterday, there was an excellent event organized by No Cold War, involving Dilma Rousseff, former foreign minister of Brazil, Celso Amorim, speakers from China, and so on. This discussion is taking place on China, particularly in the global south, and this is greatly to the advantage which it's used in an economic system which works. And finally, literally to end, this poses a very serious question. Is capitalism still a progressive system? Because you have to draw the following conclusion. If state capitalism can lift 853 million people out of poverty, if capitalism can produce a 1,800% increase in household consumption in 42 years, if capitalism can lead to average life expectancy being 3 years longer than you would expect from per capita GDP, as in China, then there is only one conclusion. Capitalism is a progressive system. It remains a progressive system. Capitalism is capable of such gigantic advances for humanity. So paradoxically, the ultra-leftist critique of China, that it's capitalism, actually leads to a very rightist conclusion indeed. Thank you very much indeed for listening.